Hello, welcome back to Theater Journal Shorts. I'm here today with Professor Katie Walker to discuss her article, Magic of the Mundane, Exposing Occult Fraud in Early Modern Drama, which is out in the September 2025 special issue of Theater Journal on magic. That's volume 77, issue 3. Hello, Katie. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Taryn.
I'm really excited to dig into your article for Theater Journal. I was wondering if you could start by giving our viewers a brief summary of the topic of your article and also what your main argument is.
Absolutely. So I'm looking at in the article Magic of the Mundane, the idea that not all magic on the early modern stage is the spectacular demonic conjurations that we are so familiar with. I know we all kind of appreciate and really enjoy Dr. Faustus demons or the witches in Macbeth. But I was interested in what I noticed as a very common motif in early modern drama, namely the idea that there was magic that was much more humble, that was much more about the body, that was about lower class figures, for example, learning how to juggle or learning how to deceive with other forms of divination. And so I found this kind of huge archive of material that thinks about how to posture as a magician in the Renaissance. And so that got me started thinking about, okay, what are people saying? And then how does that show up on the stage, right? And so the article thinks about a really kind of grand text that is about exposing magical fraud. And this is Reginald Scott's The Discovery of Witchcraft. It was first published in 1584 with subsequent editions. And this is a very famous text because not only does it kind of purport to expose the folly of witchcraft belief, but it also includes this very long section at the end that teaches you how to do magic tricks. So it commits that sin of exposing the trick, right, in the magical community. So all these things came together. And so what I was noticing was that these types of texts were playing with the idea of belief. And so it wasn't just that there is no magic. And Reginald Scott certainly believes in demons. He believes in other forces of supernatural agency. And this stage too reflects this idea that it's not that it's one thing or the other. It's not that it's, that there are demons everywhere, nor is it necessarily that there's no magic at all and we live in a disenchanted world. Rather, it's the excitement comes from the space between the two. It's what Sir Thomas Browne calls this mode of being betwixt jest and earnest, right? Between the silliness and the seriousness of magical belief. And so my article argues that even texts that show us how the trick is done, and this is through Thomas Middleton's The Puritan Widow, but also through a play by Ben Jonson called The Devil is an Ass. Even when we know what the trick is, there's still that element of wonder. There's still that element of what can natural magic do, right? And so I think that there's a real affective power in the theater during the Renaissance that kind of points up what is exciting about knowing the trick, right? And being part of the trick, but still having that possibility that the trick could produce something unexpected or something really, truly magical. And so my article explores how those two plays are talking to both Reginald Scott's Discovery of Witchcraft, but also other texts in the period, which sometimes the titles are really silly. So there's kind of the art of juggling, but there's also a text called Hocus Pocus Junior. So, um, but they're texts that really do work as these exposés on what the category of belief is in the Renaissance.
That's also fascinating. First of all, I love a good how-to book. And second, I work a lot on backstage technology and spectacle in modern and contemporary Chinese theater. And so I love that a lot of the observations you're making about magic specifically also resonate more broadly with the way we understand theater to operate between jest and earnest, knowing how things work, but suspending that belief is really part of the pleasure of viewing. I'm curious, how did you come to this topic?
That's a great question. So there's two ways that I came to it. And there's, I mean, there's a serious way, which is that my work previously looks at early modern science. And in the 16th and 17th centuries, science and magic are very closely related in terms of method, in terms of the types of questions they're asking. I was looking at Scott and these other texts for my book on instinct. But now I'm moving to this next book. And this next book is really inspired by the fact that I live in Las Vegas. Um, as you can imagine, there are a ton of magical grifters in the space that I live in, and it's actually quite wonderful because some of my students work for magic shows or are associated with the entertainment industry here in ways that provide me with a new archive. So my next book is going to be called The Grift of Renaissance Magic, but it's really inspired by this space that I think of as a theater. I think of all of Las Vegas itself as a giant stage in which you do have all of these people who are hustling, right? And they're playing upon belief and they're playing upon the desire to be entertained. And it works and it comes together in really beautiful, fascinating ways in Vegas in particular.
That's fascinating. I cannot wait for that book. So I was going to ask about how this connects to sort of broader concerns of your research, but you've told us that a little bit already, referencing both your books. So I'd love to invite you to talk more about the first book if you'd like, or also how you feel like this article in particular connects to broader conversations that are going on in the field of theater and performance studies right now.
Absolutely. So I'm really interested in these figures both on stage and who are talking to the stage, who are kind of marginalized in different ways. So that's where my research really kind of centers, whether I'm talking about science or magic. So I'm interested in figures like astrologers or what we would call cunning folk of the Renaissance, people who don't necessarily have, university degrees, but bring a type of expertise and a type of confidence with that expertise that is really delightful. So all of this feeds into both the Instinct book, but also this next project where I'm looking at quack astrologers, fake medical practitioners, figures who play with the desires of people, right? And of course, that shows up on stage in so many different ways. And so, one of the things that I've found with looking at these marginalized figures is that the stage itself, and I think this is where the piece about the broader implications comes in, the stage itself becomes this venue where all of these different voices during the Renaissance have authority, even if the person themselves doesn't have authority, right? So I'm thinking of, for example, the soothsayer in Antony and Cleopatra. He's this figure who seems to be tied to the court, but not quite. He sometimes travels with Antony, he sometimes just kind of floats around. And yet, all of his predictions come true, all of his knowledge that he offers, what he calls in the book of nature, right, are accurate and compelling. So I think for theater history and for thinking about the theater, one thing I want us to do more broadly is to listen to those voices of a character who appears in, two scenes, for example, or who talks back to, say, Hamlet, or who, protests what Dr. Faustus is saying, right? Those figures, I believe, have something really key to tell us. And related to that, I think too, when I'm talking about belief in the theater, it also, for my students and in my work, kind of troubles this notion that we are super modern spectators, right? That we have come so far in history and we no longer believe in ghosts and demons and things like that. Actually, in the Renaissance, they too had a healthy dose of skepticism. It's not that they were these completely gullible, non-thinking individuals, right? It's that belief was in conversation with these other forces. And so I compare it when I teach, in particular, when I teach Middleton and Johnson. I tell my students the story about how whenever I watch The Exorcist, which oddly enough I do quite often, but I say, as I sit there, I say, not real, not real. I know this, and yet part of me part of my body is frightened, right? And that I think proves, or at least suggests, that we are not as removed from a healthy dose of excitement and belief in the occult as we would like to think, right? And so I think thinking about theater in those terms also could kind of bolster our research and bring new perspectives to light.
Absolutely. Well, and I think too, I am not an early modernist, so this is probably a facile comparison, but just in terms of periods of massive social upheaval, other kinds of change, right? The particular uptick in the desire to believe in these sorts of magical or other things as an explanation for a world that's quickly becoming beyond our own ability to understand it. I see some parallels to our current moment, perhaps, as
I do
well.
too. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I think that, interest in vampire fiction right now and other forms of romance and fantasy is certainly a sign of certain forces at work, right? Absolutely.
Yeah. So then just to conclude, again, you've already gestured to this a little bit, but for especially for undergrad readers who might be giving your article as well as this video for a class assignment, what would you say are some of the most important takeaway points or how you're hoping they'll connect it to what's going on in their contemporary world?
Absolutely. So that's really key. I think when students bring their own interests or what they notice to research, it enlivens it in ways that are so powerful. So, like I said, the fact that I live in Vegas led me in part to this topic. And I encourage my students, if you see something in theater that resonates, that's where the research really is. We don't need more papers, for example, on Shakespeare and kingship or we don't that's not as exciting, I think, as students who are noticing these moments that spark a kind of ping of curiosity, right? And so what I hope is that at the very least my article shows a methodology where you can notice something that seemingly is minor or that we might kind of initially brush off, but that there could be something there, and it could be historical or it might actually be contemporary, right? The reason that Macbeth speaks to a student today might have a kind of particular contemporary historical force that is worth researching. So I hope that that in part inspires some folks to branch out in that way and to gain confidence and to know that there's so much more to say even about theater written 400, 500 years ago.
I love that. And I will play that clip in particular for my students who I think really, again, to all the students who might be watching this, like whatever feels intuitive often is a good thing to follow. It takes time and training to develop those kinds of intuition. But yes, that ping of curiosity or that strikes me as strange moment is the seed of so much excellent and fascinating and fun research. So it's been a
Absolutely.
lot of fun and also fascinating to learn a little bit more about your piece today. So, for all of our viewers out there, again, I am speaking with Professor Katie Walker about her article, Magic of the Mundane, Exposing Occult Fraud in Early Modern Drama, which is going to be out in the September 2025 issue of Theater Journal. That's volume 77, issue 3. So, thank you so much, Katie, again, for taking the time and sharing your work with us today.
Thank you. This was a delight.